Hello, hello, and welcome to the Thyroid Pharmacist Healing Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Izabella Wentz, and today we're going to be talking about seems like a very specific topic, but this is such a important topic for many people with thyroid issues to consider. So, the connection between the thyroid, the MTHFR gene variation, the gallbladder, and fatty liver. I have a very special guest today, nutritionist Lisa Windbourn, who spends her time really helping women with fatty liver, with no gallbladder, and with the MTHFR gene variation take charge of their own health. She helps them have more energy, sleep better, and she also helps them lose weight with methylation focused nutrition. Welcome, Lisa. It's so great to have you.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. So, I know a lot of us that are into functional medicine, we don't just one day wake up and decide we want to go to college for functional medicine, right? A lot of us have our own unique healing journeys and perhaps some life experiences that nudge us this way. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you came to be an expert in the gallbladder, liver, and MTHFR?
Absolutely. Well, I think there's some element of guidance. Like we kind of get guided, those of us that are sort of like really tuned into like our bodies. There's some element of being guided to solutions that maybe we're trying to help others, but they actually end up helping ourselves. And that's kind of what it was like for me. It goes all the way back to probably middle school when, like puberty and I started gaining weight and I just didn't I didn't know what was going on. And so I started really diving into nutrition, which is I felt like I just kind of knew intuitively that nutrition had to be the way to kind of solve this rather than like supplements. And I did like exercise, but for me, it was really nutrition. Um, and then I did a lot of dieting, I ended up really ruining my metabolism. And I think I actually kicked off hypothyroidism because then I struggled for decades with low body temperature, hair loss, coarse hair, cracked heels, like dry skin. And I didn't really understand the connection at that time, but I went into chemistry for my major because I wanted to get a master's in nutrition because I was just like really drawn to this like healing from the root. But then after I graduated and got my undergraduate degree, I got married and I had kids and it sort of like took me off that path. And then I just kind of took the easy route, I would say, and I started working for a pharmaceutical company. I stayed with that company for 18 years until I was like, this is not satisfying. You kind of wake up one day from your fog and you're just like, this is not it. Like, I need to be doing something else with my life. And so then I enrolled in a functional nutrition program. And, one thing led to another. I realized a lot of people were struggling with their gallbladder. And in my functional nutrition training, when I learned about bile, it was sort of like getting smacked over the head like, this is a big deal. And I don't hear anybody talking about bile. And I remember thinking, like, bile is like a sexy fluid because of what it does for your body, even though it's like this green stuff. But I just remember thinking how really cool it was. And then one thing led to another. I was growing my social media account. And then I realized like a lot of people kept telling me they have gallstones, they're struggling with their gallbladder. And I started digging into that. And then that led me to fatty liver, which 1 in 3 people have fatty liver. And then I started researching that. That led me to MTHFR. And I realized half the population has an MTHFR variation. So I felt like I was playing this game of hot cold. Like it just kept getting hotter and hotter. And and then and just a little bit about how I actually stumbled on your research. And once like I was starting to put things together and realizing how important MTHFR was. And I read one of your research blogs, and you said that when you learned about MTHFR and started taking B vitamins, it was actually a turning point for you. So then that kind of like confirmed. I was like, okay, this is a big deal. And so that kind of just that's my backstory and how I was like, okay, people need to know about this because it's just not talked about enough.
Yeah, and it's like all connected, and I don't think a lot of people are aware of that. So I used to work in pharmaceutical sales as well. My background is a pharmacist, And sort of like you, I was on this trajectory in my pharmaceutical career where I was going to work as a medical science liaison, somebody that would be like very basically very knowledgeable about one particular drug and all of its competitors and that health condition. And I was working towards a career in that, but throughout that process, I was like, "Wait a minute, um, I'm talking about, like, asthma medications and utilizing these things, but there are actually nutritional things we can do for asthma, and fish oils, and probiotics, and so on and so forth," and I had Hashimoto's at that point, and I became very disillusioned because I was going to, like, pharmaceutical conferences, and I had found the gluten-free and dairy-free diet really helped me feel so much better. Yet everybody at the conferences, we were talking about health, how to make people healthier, and the food that we were served was like candy in a bowl, you know? So I just became very disillusioned with that, similar to you, where I was like, man, I really love chemistry and I really love helping people and I really want to help people with their health, but this is not the way, right?
Yes, exactly. And just to kind of add a little bit to that, I didn't realize that I had an MTHFR variation. So this was becoming very interesting to me. And then I started putting the pieces together like, well, this is a symptom of MTHFR and I have that. Well, this is a symptom. Do I have MTHFR? And then so I got tested and sure enough, I do. And then I was like, and that's why my family has gallstones. That's why they have fatty liver, obesity, diabetes, mental health. Like all of it suddenly just was like this big epiphany, like, oh my gosh, this this is affecting me. And so yeah, but I'm totally with you on like we shouldn't just be doing pharmaceuticals and we don't want to be just treating the symptom because that's not helping anyone. It's just like kicking the can down the road is what I was thinking.
Yeah, for sure. I think it could help acute situations, and there's always a time and place for medications. But sometimes there are these root cause solutions. And I know when I was on my healing journey with Hashimoto, somebody mentioned MTHFR to me. And I was sort of like, okay, there's no way I have this. I'm not like a mutant, right? They said I might have this gene mutation. And so I looked into it. And sure enough, I did have MTHFR. And at that point, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. This is like the most terrible news I've ever gotten. And once I sort of went through the process of understanding what it is and what it isn't, I realized like this was not such a terrible thing to have. Could you share a little bit more for everybody listening? What exactly is the MTHFR? Some people say gene mutation. I call it a gene variation. And what does it mean when you have that?
I'm with you. I don't call it a mutation. I think it's one of the things that make us different from each other. Our genetics are different. If we all had the same genetics, we'd all be the same people. And these little genes play a role. So MTHFR, now I'm going to say the full name. Don't get don't let your eyes glaze over. So it's methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. Okay, so now you know that. Don't worry about it. It's an enzyme, and enzymes are like little workers. They're like, and I know you know this, but for the audience, they do work inside of our bodies. They're little workers, and for the most part, the MTHFR works in the liver, and it activates a special B vitamin called folate, which is vitamin B9, and that little vitamin, the activated vitamin, is involved in so many things. So the reason that, and I kind of think of our body sort of like gears in a watch, and all these gears are going around and they're all like feeding into each other. And the MTHFR can be a slow worker. So think about like if your worker is fast, then it's keeping up with everything. But if your worker is sick and it's slow, and it's going to impact everybody else down the line. And it's sort of like a bottleneck. So that's why the MTHFR is kind of like it's like the crux of a lot of issues because it affects mental health. It affects your ability to absorb fat soluble nutrients, to detox heavy metals and balance hormones, for cell repair. So it's involved in gut health, like keeping your gut lining strong, making good red blood cells. So it's involved, like this little worker, his output is involved in so many different things. So if he's working slow, which is what a variation means, some variations mean it's a faster worker, and some variations mean it's a slower. But with the MTHFR variation, you can have between a 20% and a 70% slower worker. So imagine somebody that has a 70%. And now this would not be a big deal. So until their modern age, with all the stress and the toxins, it wouldn't be a big deal, except we have some hidden enemies in our lifestyle and in our food. And I don't know if you want to talk about that now or we want to wait till later.
I think definitely want to get into food and some of the things that can really cause a backlog of MTHFR. But for everybody listening, I want to just mention something. Just because you have MTHFR doesn't mean that you're going to be sick, right?
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of people have it and they don't even realize it. So it's really like it can get, so I describe your genes sort of like the bottom of a riverbed, where if your river is full, you won't see the bottom of the riverbed. So if you're taking care of yourself, you're managing your stress, you have good social connections, you have a good diet, you will not see those genes. It's when you have stress, you're not taking care of yourself, you're not sleeping enough, your diet's full of processed foods. That's when those genes start to show and make a difference in how you feel.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I know I'm from Poland and people grew up eating beets there. Like beets are just such a common part of the diet there. It's just almost like an every other day or daily thing. You eat beet soup, you eat stewed beets, you eat just a side of beets. There's like dressings made with beets, kvass made with beets in other parts of Eastern Europe. And I'm like, my parents both have these gene variations, and everybody in my family does, to my knowledge, but none of them have had any health issues. Now, I moved to the States, my whole family did when I was 9 years old. And very quickly, I shifted from this like very earth and earth to table or farm to table Polish diet to the processed American diet. I remember my dad would take me to Wendy's and McDonald's. And he would be like, "Do you like this food?" And I would be like, yeah, I like it, dad, because I would get a toy with it, right? And so very quickly, my parents, they would get me TV dinners or whatever I would eat. You know, it's hard to it's hard to be a parent when you have kids that can be quite picky eaters. And so they were like, okay, she likes this food, we're gonna get it for her. And there wasn't as much nutritional information available, and I actually started having health challenges when I was like 18, 19 years old. Whereas my parents, like, they're still pretty healthy. My mom did have asthma in her 40s and 50s when we had lived in the US, but nobody had any issues during childhood or young adulthood, even with the same genes, right?
That is so interesting about the beets because I remember, and I struggled with seasonal affective disorder, which is another link and symptom because it affects your neurotransmitters. And I remember being like intuitively thinking I needed beets. I don't know why. This was before like a decade, probably 10 years ago. And I remember thinking I need beets in the winter. And when I would eat beets, I would feel better. And then it wasn't until like I discovered all the MTHFR, then like, oh my gosh, it totally makes sense. So I really want to encourage people. The reason I say that is because listen to your intuition. Sometimes our bodies know what we need, and we need to just tune in. And because if you're drawn to some, maybe leafy greens or beets or citrus fruits, maybe there's a reason for that. And it's going to supply a nutrient that you need.
Ooh, can we get into citrus fruits? What do they provide?
So they're high in folate and vitamin C, which are really important. So there's this, so the MTHFR is involved in something called the methylation cycle. And just think of it like a flywheel. It goes round and round. It converts homocysteine into SAMe. It's one of the body's main antioxidants, but you need a lot of other nutrients to help this worker. This worker needs a lot of nutrients, and vitamin C and folate obviously are two big nutrients. and magnesium. So citrus fruits provide a lot of minerals and vitamins and antioxidants, all kinds of good things.
Mm. I love that. So we talked a little bit about what the MTHFR gene, and we mentioned some of the health conditions that could be associated with. Can we talk a little bit about the connection between autoimmune disease, Hashimoto's, and MTHFR?
Yes. So because the MTHFR is so important for detoxification, if you have a slow worker and you are overloaded with stress, overloaded with toxins, and you're eating foods with synthetic B vitamins, which we can talk about that, um, it slows detoxification down, and you could actually get a buildup of heavy metals. So there's many facets, many parts of this, and this is the first part: is you can get a buildup of heavy metals, and what your body does to protect you from those is store them in fatty tissues, one of which is the thyroid. So it can interfere with thyroid function. Another thing is the MTHFR is involved in bile production and absorbing fat soluble nutrients. And if you're not absorbing anti inflammatory fat soluble nutrients like vitamins A, D, and E, you can have more inflammation in the body. And vitamin A, especially, is important for thyroid health. And it's involved in making tight cell junctions in your gut lining. So you have kind of this like it's playing a role in your thyroid, in your fat soluble nutrients, and the gut health. And then that can create sort of this perfect storm for autoimmune and Hashimoto's.
Yeah, absolutely. I have found that a lot of times we really do need to focus on methylation support with Hashimoto's and autoimmunity and helping people just feel human again when they have a thyroid condition. I know for me personally, I was very surprised to learn how all of these things I had learned about in pharmacy school that public health officials do to help us actually like were backfiring. So, fluoride in the water supply, it was used to help people have better teeth, right? And prevent dental cavities. But what we realized is that fluoride, and even in the doses that you get from your water supply, can suppress thyroid function. So it's like you have a thyroid issue, you need to filter your water. The other thing that I've come to find is really, really, public health officials were like, people that are low in iodine have thyroid problems. Let's put iodine in the salt supply to help people have better iodine levels. And that iodine in the salt actually led to more autoimmune thyroid disease. And again, so I'm like, okay, now I have to switch out my salt. And now the other thing that I learned about as like the one of the greatest things that public health is fortifying our breads and cereals, right? Can we get into that a little bit and why? I mean, I'm just like, in theory, it's good, but why does it not work for some of us, right?
Yes, in theory, it's good. So people used to get the majority of their folate from grains like wheat products, but then people started preferring white wheat because it was more refined. I don't, they liked the taste of it. So they lost all these nutrients when they refined the grain. They lost it from the endosperm and the bran, or the germ, I'm sorry, and the bran. So we had the endosperm, which was that's what was used to make white bread, but it didn't have a lot of nutrients. So then, there was this international, all these symptoms of nutrient deficiency started popping up, like muscle issues, mental health problems, heart disease, uh, like muscle twitching, nervous system disorders, and infertility. And so researchers discovered that it was because we're missing some major nutrients like riboflavin, thiamine, iron, and folate. And so they started mandating that you have to add, like food manufacturers have to add these certain nutrients back into the food supply. They decided that folic acid, it's a version of folate, was what they were going to use instead of folate because it's more shelf stable and it doesn't degrade in cooking. And so they did that. And it helped 50% of the population with neurotube defects. Okay. So the studies show that it did improve outcomes. However, it actually backfired on the other 50% because now folic acid is a form of folate that your body doesn't recognize, your worker doesn't recognize. And so he sort of like grabs it and then his hands are like locked on it and he doesn't know what to do with it. And so your worker is like out of service now because he's holding on to this folic acid and he's just like totally confused. So um it slows down your worker even more or like blocks him completely. Now, your body has workarounds. Your body can work around this problem and there's like multiple ways. So I'm just because you consume folic acid doesn't mean it's detrimental to you, but it does add another layer to the problem.
I love the way that you explain this. And I think one thing we may have mentioned, but about 50% of people have the MTHFR gene variation. And there's different combinations that we can have. We can have, um, can you explain a little bit like the heterozygous, homozygous, and the different variations?
There's two main variations that are studied the most. One is, well, it's known as the 677, and the other one is the 1298. The 677 is more severe than, so if you have one, you have two genes. If one of your genes has a 677 variation, you have a 40% slower worker. If you have two copies, it's about a 70% slower worker. And then with 1298, it's about a 20%. One copy is a 20% slower worker. Two copies is about 40%. So you have somewhere in the spectrum of between 20% and 70% reduced methylation. And the 1298 is more indicative of like blood clots and heart disease. And then the 677 is more a problem with detoxification.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they were like, "Oh, this is working," and it worked for half of the people that didn't have that gene variation, and probably they didn't know what was going on at the time, but now we have that data to help us understand.
And I think still, if you look it up, the CDC and some other organizations will say that there's no link between folic acid and an MTHFR variation or all these problems because they have data that shows that folic acid actually helps. So it's just it hasn't trickled down up to the big organizations yet. So just
I think when you get into the weeds and the pathways like we do, then you can actually understand why that statement could both be true and not true at the same time. So, we're going to get into some of the nutrients and foods that support methylation. But I think the first thing to mention is we talked about a little bit of a workaround. I know one of the things I did was I started to take betaine with pepsin, and within 3 days, I was like a new woman. My fatigue got so much better. And there's a big connection with low stomach acid and hypothyroidism. And so I was entirely of the opinion at the time that I must have had low stomach acid and the betaine with pepsin was helping me feel significantly better because I was finally digesting my food. And I think it's a digestive enzyme. And part of that was true, but betaine also has another role in the body. It is, hint, hint, it's beet derived, right? And it also supports it's kind of like the back door for helping. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
yeah, so it's related to methionine. So there's this intermediate in the methylation cycle called methionine. So that's related to pepsin, and it uh, it can't. So your body can use methionine. It can kind of go around use methionine, and it could also use glycine, and it can use riboflavin. So there's yeah, so that's really cool about our bodies is it's so adaptable and flexible, and we can support, just because you have this variation, it's not the end of the world. And there's a lot of fear based out there about gene mutations, which I really don't like that. I want people to think about their health journey as like a calling to learn more about themselves rather than like, oh, I'm doomed, like there's nothing I can do. There's so much you can do. And there's so many ways that your body's going to help you. Like if you eat beets or you take the pepsin, you're supporting that methylation cycle so that if that worker is down and out, there's backups for him.
Yeah, and I love that our body is so wise. And I think sometimes when a lot of these pathways are impacted is when we really start having troubles. But in many cases, our body can compensate even if you just do one or of a few different things. Um, I know that a lot of information is out there about if you have MTHFR, then don't take this kind of supplement, take this kind of supplement. Can you talk a little bit more about maybe methylfolate, folinic acid, folic acid, and all of the different things? Which path is sort of the best path to take?
Well, number one, if you think you have an MTHFR variation, you probably do. You don't have to go get tested for it. It it will help you just to think about supporting your methylation, your MTHFR. If you want to get tested and spend $200, you can, but just save your money and put it into higher quality food and maybe a little bit of supplementation. So the first thing is do not consume, well, I should say limit your consumption of folic acid, which is found in a lot of refined processed wheat, rice, and corn products. So this is pizza, your conventional pizza, pasta, bread, cereal, the cookies, crackers, and inexpensive store vitamins are going to have folic acid. So that's what I talked about, where the worker like holds the folic acid and then he's like frozen. He doesn't know what to do. Um, that's the form you want to avoid. So folic acid, we want to avoid folic acid. We want folate is found in nature. So that's found in leafy greens, animal proteins, cruciferous vegetables, and citrus fruits. I mean, it's in a lot of things, but it's mostly whole foods. So if you think about getting away, like think about one type of processed food that you eat a lot and think about switching that to a whole foods type carbohydrate. So maybe instead of eating a sandwich and you have white bread, you could switch out. You could have the meat and the cheese, and then you have a piece of fruit with it instead of that bread. So that's just one example. But you could also switch to organic or whole grain forms of wheat products, and that would have more folate. Then we get into a couple of like lab derived forms, which are made from like fermenting bacteria. So they are synthetic, but they're the active form. So this would be methylfolate, but you need to be careful with methylfolate because some people are very sensitive to this activated form and it can cause them to have anxiety and overwhelm and feeling angry and aggressive. And that's because this methylfolate is also involved in making dopamine, and if you have a high amount of dopamine, you can have like, you can be really like angry and aggressive and just like overwhelmed and anxiety. So you have to be careful with B vitamins. I see a lot of people on social media find out about MTHFR and then they're promoting like a high dose of methylfolate. And I'm like, oh no, this is not good. And then, so what you could do is either, if you're sensitive, I would say if you have problems with anxiety and overwhelm, then stay away from methylfolate. If you are more of a person that experiences depression, sadness, melancholy, then you can do, and for me, like that's me, like sadness, melancholy, low energy. And so I need methylfolate. Otherwise, I don't feel the same. I don't have the energy that I do. I feel really low. And even a couple days of not taking it, I notice a big difference. So it depends on your personality. Are you prone to anxiety or are you prone to depression? Is how you would know. So that's this active methylfolate. Then we have something called folinic acid, which it's kind of like a cross between the natural folate. And I know this is like really technical, and it's a spectrum, so it's the cross between the folate and full methylfolate. So it kind of gives you the boost you need but not overwhelming your system. But honestly, the best thing is to get it through your food: leafy greens, beets, animal proteins, and then go from there.
I really love that explanation. Thank you so much for going into it because I have also seen people who, they have the MTHFR gene variation and then it's like, "Oh, I need a high dose of methylfolate." And then they take it and they're like, "I just went to the hospital with a panic attack. Like I thought I was having a heart attack," because it can definitely upregulate that. And I love the pearl about if you tend to be more depressive and low energy, this is something that you can benefit from. If you tend to be more anxious, perhaps look into getting it from foods, or perhaps folinic acid might be a better choice for you.
Yeah.
Um, what about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's become so much more common, and I know a lot of very, very smart people that are, they're not eating crappy diets, right? But they're still struggling with this. What's going on there, and how is it all connected to MTHFR and everything that we've been talking about today?
MTHFR plays a role in fatty liver in that if your detox is slow, then you can get a buildup of toxins, which can damage the liver. And then that can lead to a fatty liver because the liver, one of its jobs is to package up fats and send them out. And so if it's not able to package up those lipoproteins, those fats, they fall apart in the liver. But there's another genetic variation called PEMT, which works side by side with MTHFR to make bile and and to make phosphatidylcholine, which is involved in shuttling out these fats. So we eat fats. Our liver is like organizing. It's like, okay, I'm sending this here, I'm sending that there, but it has to package up these fats with this phosphatidylcholine or PC. And if there's not enough PC, then the fats fall apart and they stay in the liver. So there's kind of like two pathways, major pathways for fatty liver. One is like damaged, and then one is you don't have enough of this raw material, phosphatidylcholine. So,
I love that. I have seen choline as a supplement recommendation for people with fatty liver. You can also get it from foods. What is your preferred source of choline?
you well, so you can get it from sunflower lecithin, which is lecithin can get converted into a phosphatidylcholine. But eggs are a good source of choline. I mean, proteins, again, cruciferous vegetables and leafy greens. All the same thing. It's like we get the same. So it's animal proteins, cruciferous vegetables, leafy greens, citrus fruits, all going to have choline and help with this problem. So, and eggs, dairy.
I love that. So it's like truly food as medicine is utilizing some of these things to heal yourself. If somebody has genetic variations and MTHFR and they have fatty liver and gallbladder issues, can we give them kind of like a breakdown of some of the best diet and lifestyle changes to make?
Yes. Okay. Well, I used to think nutrition was everything, but now I'm realizing that our breath is actually more important. How we breathe is actually more important than our nutrition. So the first thing is to notice, how are you breathing? Are your shoulders up here? Are you holding your breath? Are you doing short and shallow breathing? Like, I lived this way for such a long time. I had to retrain my lungs. I think most of us, because we're just used to living in such a stressful environment, that we are breathing in a way that is raising our cortisol and keeping us stuck, and we're not healing. So you could have the best diet, taking the most expensive supplements, but if you're in a fight or flight mode, if your nervous system is stuck, then it's not really going to help much. So just taking inventory of how you breathe, and you definitely want to start working on just becoming aware of your breath. Like, think of something that can remind you to check your breath every day. Like every time you open your phone, check your breath. Every time you go to the bathroom, check your breath. And then start slowing your breath down so that you get to the point where you're breathing in coherence. So coherence breathing is 6-second inhale, 6-second exhale when you're at rest. And that is like creates a symphony in your body that allows your body to start healing. So that's step one. And then the next step is actually to think about, how are you exposed to toxins? And I don't want people to be fearful of toxins, but just think about, do you have mold in your house? Because that's a big trigger. Are you constantly exposed to mold? Um, are you slathering yourself with all kinds of makeup in the morning, and your skin cream and all of that? Is that adding a load to your liver? And your just relationships, do you have toxic relationships? Do you have toxic thoughts? And really starting to pick that apart and thinking. And then the third thing is diet. So you want to get the processed foods out and start eating more protein and fruits and vegetables, and then think about supplements. So supplements are kind of like, they're really helpful, but you need to understand the foundations first because they might not actually be helping that much or to the degree. But although I would say one thing that really helps is salt, electrolytes, and magnesiums. That can be like a first step if you do want to start taking a supplement, is doing a salt flush for a couple of weeks just to, because we are kind of salt deficient. Salt and magnesium and potassium are really important electrolytes. So that would be kind of the first one. And then think about a food-based multivitamin like a beef organ complex, because they're food-based, and beef organs are one of the highest sources of riboflavin, which is a workaround that your body can use. And then if you do okay with that, then you could switch to a multivitamin with a B complex.
Can you tell us what is a salt flush?
Salt flush. So a salt flush is where you just basically take 8 ounces of water, add some unrefined salt, not table salt, unrefined salt, and then you can flavor it up with like squeeze a lemon or lime. And then you would drink that twice a day for a couple of weeks. And honestly, people feel so much more energized because we're just lacking salt. We're afraid of it. And actually, a lot of people are bloated because they don't have enough salt. We kind of have this paradigm, this opposite thought process about salt. And yes, sometimes some people's bodies don't tolerate salt, but that's something that you can just, it's inexpensive and you can just do it and see how it affects you. You don't have to buy the expensive electrolyte powders. You just get some nice unrefined sea salt, and it's a fourth of a teaspoon in 8 ounces of water.
I love that, and I love that you add some flavoring to it. I was using Soleil or maybe Sol. I use that sometimes too, which is very similar, but I love the idea of making it a little bit tastier with some lemon juice. So I love that.
Lime juice. I really like it with lime. It's kind of like a hint of a margarita or something.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That sounds amazing. Um, do you have any kind of guides for our community if they wanted to go a little bit deeper?
Well, I have my free MTHFR guide, which you can get that by tapping the link in my profile on any of my channels. So Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. So that would be the first step, is get that free guide. And I go more into, everything we just talked about and sort of like written down on paper. And then there's also, if you want to go deeper, I do have a MTHFR guide and meal plan, which you'll have to just send me a message if you want that. And I can send you a link.
Perfect. And everybody watching, you can make sure you follow Lisa on her social media profiles to grab that. We're also going to put that in the show notes so that you could easily link that from the podcast. And before we jump into rapid fire questions, I wanted to ask real quick about where people can learn more about your work.
Yeah. So I'm at Lisa Health Joy. It's all one word, Lisa Health Joy, on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. And I do have a website, but it's very basic. I don't have a lot of blogs there. I'm going to be putting most of my time and energy into my YouTube channel. I just feel like it's more digestible if you're watching and learning and you can listen to it. So those are the four places you can find me.
Amazing. Can't wait to check out your YouTube channel. I know I've been very excited about more of the long form conversations. I was trying to do like 3-second videos and I was like, this just isn't me. It's taking me such a long time to do this. So I love that you're sharing on YouTube, and I love having you on the podcast as well.
I've really enjoyed it. It's been a really great conversation.
I agree. I agree. Part of what I wanted to do now is to do like a little bit of a rapid fire to ask you some questions. So, one would be, is taking methylfolate the only solution to having an MTHFR variation?
No. You want me to list some? You could do a glycine, trimethylglycine, or creatine before you try methylfolate.
Thank you so much for that. Does everyone with an MTHFR variation have health problems?
No, you usually have to be under a lot of stress and have a lot of toxins in your life.
Great. Thank you so much. Do you have any wellness hacks that you just refuse to participate in?
Yes, the cold plunging. I just don't think that's good for people with MTHFR because their systems are already dealing with a lot of stress. And then you cold plunge, and yeah, maybe it feels good. I did it once and it was brutal. And I actually did it in a cold, like a stream. I did it in an icy cold river. And it was brutal, and you do feel amazing afterwards, but I'll probably never do it again.
I'm with you on that. I feel like women with thyroid conditions, we don't need another stressor like that. But I mean, yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. I will not be doing any cold plunges, but you do you. If anybody loves them, you do you. I also am not a fan of bone broth hot chocolate. That's just wrong. I love them independently, but just together, uh-uh.
Yeah.
The most outlandish thing you've ever tried for your health.
Handstands. I I don't know where I stumbled across something about how handstands could be really good for your nervous system, and I was doing that for a little while, but it's just like I don't know. It was too much. It did feel kind of cool and was like learning a new skill, but it, yeah, not very practical.
That's kinda cool though. I think I've heard worse, so um, supplement you'll never give up. So if the supplement police came to your house and they said you could keep just one of your supplements,
Okay, would can I keep my multivitamin? Is that or is that too many? Yeah, I definitely do my multivitamin with. Well, I like selenium. It helps me in the B complex.
I love that. What about do you have any, like, guilty pleasures that maybe are not, like, the most on brand for a wellness professional/nutritionist?
Yes, German chocolate cake. I don't know why, but if you go to a restaurant and you order that, they bring you out like this giant piece that can serve like 5 people, and I just devour that. So, full on gluten and everything because 'cause I'm normally gluten free. I'll eat that even if it's like traditional gluten flour, folic acid, everything, and then I'll just pay for it for a couple days, like, in my health, and then I'll just have to recover from it, but yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we all have our things where it's like, it's not like the healthiest, but sometimes it's just you gotta do it. I was on a flight the other day and I was stressed out because I was like rushing from a connection to another connection and I wasn't sure if I was gonna make it. So I'm like running across and I hadn't eaten. I had a flight delay. So I'm like, okay. And I got this bag of like Lay's potato chips. Totally terrible for you, but I was like, I need the salt right now. And I just happened to see one of my colleagues, on that same flight, and she's like, "Isabella, I never thought I'd see you eating chips." She's like, "Don't you specialize in, like, nutrition?" And I'm like, "Hey."
Well, I think if you take care of yourself, then you have margin for those things every once in a while because for the most part you're really like I'm pretty dead on like every day I don't deviate from my good habits. But then when I do, I'm like, well, I'll just get back on.
You test your detox capabilities, right? Do you have any, like, red flags that your body gives you when you know something is off, where you're like, "I just really need to dial things in?"
Yes, cracked heels for me, and they actually just flared up again, and I was like, "Something's going on with my liver and gallbladder." And for me, it had to do with some perimenopause, like low progesterone and fluctuating estrogen, because that plays a big role. And so I got on my bile salts. I started doing probiotics and putting beef tallow on my heels, and then within a couple days, it healed it up.
I love that. I'm gonna have to recommend that for whenever people ask me for what to do about cracked heels. That's amazing. I didn't know about this potential connection. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you bet.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge with us and everything that you've gone through from your personal experience. I think this will be an incredibly healing conversation for everybody listening that perhaps is dealing with MTHFR, liver gallbladder issues, thyroid issues, as well as any kind of fatty liver.
And hope we just take the fear level down on MTHFR too.
Absolutely. For everybody listening, thank you so much for being here with us. And hopefully, this has been a healing conversation for you.